It's great to have you on again. I know that you participated in the previous Vigil as well. One moment. You are now unmuted.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're very, very welcome. I know that you obviously participated in the last Vigil, the Reconnect Julian Vigil, and unfortunately it's been, going into the 3rd month since that time. Julian Assange is still disconnected from the outside world. What are your thoughts on what we've seen, the developments since our last Vigil?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it just keeps getting worse. They're clearly just trying to sideline and crush him at every step, and keep him disconnected from the world, because the level of influence I think they've decided that he's able to have, even simply being on the internet from the Ecuadorian embassy, is too much for them. And obviously the leadership in Ecuador is now seems to increasingly be turning their back on him. As you and Susie have documented, it's impacting his health, and it's really is a terrible situation. And something I kind of wanted to stress is that it could be Julian could be any of us if we had enough power. He was so successful, and WikiLeaks was so successful at revealing the truth, that's why he finds himself in this situation. And it really could be any of us. So anybody out there who is even a low-level independent journalist or citizen journalist, or even just you consider yourself someone that focuses a lot on trying to spread the truth to people, if any of us were to get to that level, I think we would be equally crushed and maligned, and have the equal amounts of propaganda thrown against us. And I think that's an important point, because it's not like it's something specific about Julian that is why he faces the situation. Instead, it's the specifics of what he was able to accomplish in terms of getting truth out to the actual people, and not just the ruling elite.
That's absolutely an incredible point, and really extremely true. I mean, we see so much effort in the media to make this about Julian Assange's personality and not about the work that he does. That's an amazing point.
Yeah, absolutely. And you actually can see that same strategy used against Snowden or Chelsea Manning. It's let's make it about their personality or something in their past, because if they make it about the reality of the truth that's come forward, or that argument is not one they want to have.
Exactly. And that's we also see that in the portrayal in the media narrative of the issue with the embassy itself being about skipping bail. And that is so clearly not the real issue at hand. So we see that all over every aspect of this story.
It reminds me of now that the charges have all been dropped, except for skipping bail. It reminds me of when people are arrested by police, protesters are arrested by police, and one of the things they charge them with is resisting arrest, and then the other stuff is dropped, and then they just have a resisting arrest. And it's like, well, why was I being arrested? Oh, well, that doesn't matter. You were resisting arrest. It's like, you can't just charge someone for resisting a non-existent arrest.
Absolutely. Yeah. And obviously there were never any charges filed against Julian, which is what is so incredible about this situation too, is the definite false portrayal that there is some sort of charge against him that is public, and there isn't. There may be there is very likely a secret indictment against him from the US, but obviously the press wants to ignore that. It's just an incredible amount of smearing and deflection. And
a lot of people don't. I think your average person that may be even somewhat in tune with the news that's going on doesn't realize that all the charges have been dropped, and even more don't realize that Sweden. I can't remember if they came forward and said it or leaked emails showed it or whatever, but that they wanted to drop the charges 4 years ago and were pressured by the British to continue this charade for another 4 years.
Absolutely. That was revealed by Stefania Marizzi, and her amazing results of her FOIA showed that. I mean, the Swedish authorities did drop their investigation in 2017, finally. But as you say, that was years after they wanted to, according to the documents that Stefania published. But incredible. So, why do you, I mean, we've had a number of journalists on this vigil, but I feel like there should be so many more journalists speaking up in the way that our panelists have. What makes you unique? What makes the journalists that we've had on, why is it only you all that see it this way and are willing to openly speak about it and stick your neck out for Julian Assange and WikiLeaks? Why aren't more journalists doing the same thing?
God, I don't. Yeah, that's a good question. I think the structural integrity of certain backbones is not of the highest order. I think. I think because there has been such a high level of propaganda and maligning of Julian Assange, that they're afraid that they'll be tainted, even if they agree with everything, they agree with WikiLeaks and all of that. Everything that's been brought forward, I think they're afraid they're somehow tainted by association of just putting their neck out there and saying they support Julian Assange or don't think that he should be imprisoned at all. And, that is a sad statement in and of itself of journalism in America and globally. That there are so few journalists that are willing to take that step, even of the ones that are not part of the mainstream corporate structure. I mean, I think it's easy to say why you aren't seeing a lot of like CNN journalists on this panel tonight.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much a given. But
that's a given. But yeah, the question is why aren't there more independent journalists and things like that? And why are you talking to a comedian right now? I agree, and it is a sad statement of people are putting I think careerism ahead of what they should stand for, and every journalist out there should realize that this, if you aren't going to stand up for this, you really aren't standing up for journalism at all. Even if you were to disagree with certain things Julian Assange has tweeted or whatever, you should still stand up for journalists to not be imprisoned with no charges.
Absolutely.
It's amazing that they can't make that connection and realize that this is one step in many towards fascism and just sidelining of truth and knowledge and journalism. And so I absolutely agree. There should be, you should have so many journalists calling in that you can't deal with them all.
Yeah, that would be in a world that had any moral sanity left whatsoever. But it really seems to speak to the death of journalism as having any integrity at all. When you have organizations like WikiLeaks and, as you said, comedians having to step up and actually take the role of journalism and actually taking that weight on where it maybe wasn't necessary before. It wasn't so clear that it was necessary. Although comedians have always had really sharp insight, obviously, on politics and on the political sphere. But
yeah, people often ask me or wonder why it is that comedians and I guess there's specifically a few, my show and Jimmy Dores and a couple others, are the ones talking about a lot of these issues, such as election fraud, such as so much that has come forward through WikiLeaks. And I don't know exactly, except to say that many of us as comedians are used to speaking our mind and not really being instructed on how to move forward in a career track, whereas many journalists have grown forward and have gone their years, sometimes decades of their life have been, how do I get forward in this career, in this business, in this specific job at a specific corporate entity? And very few of them break free of that. And so their kind of education has been how to fit in to some degree in this corporate mindset. And that might be some of it. There are very few that have done like what Chris Hedges did and stood up against the Iraq War, was then forced out at the New York Times and said, you know what, I don't care. I'm going to keep going down the path that I know is right. And so, and maybe it has to do with the fact that comedians we very rarely have like a set career path. It's all very much like, I'm going to go out there and speak my mind. And, you know, most comedians are just doing it for laughs, obviously. They're not worried that much about politics or that much about the news of the day. But it's possible that we haven't had the indoctrination that is kind of required of many or almost all journalists, I guess.
Absolutely. No, I think it's really an insight to really think about it in that way, as if the structure of journalists and journalistic organizations, outlets, the legacy press media, that structure is actually strangling the ability for genuine journalists with integrity to rise up and have a voice, whereas maybe the lack of structure within the comedic scene allows that type of free flow of information more.
Yeah, that could be part of it.
I'm going to check chat really fast to see if we have any questions for you. Chat, please. We love it when you collaborate with us in asking our panelists questions. So if you have them, leave them in chat. We will be collecting them on our Etherpad and asking questions of our guests. And so I wanted to ask you as well, Lee, what you think will be the outcome on the independent media sphere if Assange is continued to be silenced in the way that he is right now. Will that have a chilling effect on the independent media and its publications of really hard-hitting news that is not covered by corporate press?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that if we allow Julian Assange's imprisonment, which, you know, it basically is right now, but it could get even worse, obviously, if he were extradited to the U.S. or what have you. I think it very much would have a chilling effect, and I think other journalists should be thinking about that. As I said before, this is something that we should all be standing up for, because it's any one of us that puts out knowledge or information that is harmful to the corporate state, the ruling elite. It really could be. Now, most of us don't have access to the level of information that Julian was able to create, that flow, that river he was able to open with WikiLeaks. So in that way, we're not as threatening, and that's why we're not all locked up the way he is. But it just goes to show that this does chill out active journalism and pushing against those barriers that the corporate state has carefully set up. And I think your last guest said it very well, that this has beautifully shown how in line the media, even some of the media that was considered to be a little more legit, like The Guardian, how in line, when push comes to shove, they are with the ruling elite and the corporate state. They, at the end of the day, they're going to protect their own. They're going to protect their funders and their sponsors that are weapons contractors and Wall Street and the government that they now own. So it really did display that you could put forward very important truths that are gut-wrenching in what they mean for our society, and every journalist should be covering them and talking about them and talking about the surveillance state in which we live, or the collateral murder videos and things like that. And instead, they pivoted and decided it was time to attack the messenger and dumb down, try and get the populace back into the box of before they had this knowledge. And to some degree, I guess they've succeeded, but in a lot of ways they haven't. And I hope that it's kind of too late in that sense, that the information has been released and you can't really get us back to how dumb we were before or uninformed we were before.
I think it's really an important, crucial point to reemphasize that, as you said, anyone who does the work that Julian Assange has done would have been smeared in some way. There would have been some attempt to just create an ad hominem attack in order to deflect from the work that they've done. I think that's something that we haven't discussed yet on this stream that is really crucial to our audience's understanding of why, instead of challenging any of the work that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange has done, we just see them attacking his personality. So do you have any comment on the role that WikiLeaks, how WikiLeaks has impacted your journalism? I know we talked about this a little bit in the previous Vigil, but I'd like to, for our guests who didn't participate in that, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the way that if WikiLeaks had not published the information that it has, your journalism would have been affected.
Well, in terms of a direct sense, I definitely, use WikiLeaks files or quote from them regularly. I maybe should be a little ashamed to admit that I haven't finished it, but I'm actually still making my way through the WikiLeaks files.
Fantastic.
But that book alone, I think, is one of the best analyses of the economic and militaristic empire that America has created, and lays it out in a way that I don't think many people have laid it out. Really, the full breadth of why America chooses to invade or economically infiltrate or whatever it is various countries, and why other ones they don't. And it really is laid out better than I've ever seen it. But so there's a kind of direct way in that I'm quoting from various files or things like that and cables. But to me, the more influential way it's impacted me and impacted millions around the world is the ripples of the events that WikiLeaks helped create. I spoke about this on the last Vigil, and part of the reason I find it so interesting is because I feel like it occurred to me late. Like, I don't feel like I really added it all up until a year ago or something, long after most of these events had already transpired. But if you go down the list of the biggest events in the past 10 years that threatened at all this kind of infinite war empire, this economic destruction, this unfettered capitalist environmental destruction. If you look at the biggest events that did not fit into that line of the standard trajectory that the power elite want it to go, and actually pushed back against it in a large way, almost all of them are connected. Maybe all of them are connected to WikiLeaks, or were a ripple on a ripple of something WikiLeaks did. So the Arab Spring, which helped spawn Occupy, which the Bernie Sanders movement would not have existed without the Occupy sentiment and the ideas that had already been put forward into the zeitgeist, the idea of the 99%, the idea of this economy should work for all of us instead of just a rich few. So much of that goes back to Occupy, and so much of that goes back to the Arab Spring, and a lot of the Arab Spring would not have happened would not have sparked off without the information coming out of WikiLeaks. And then, like I said, I think a lot of the Bernie Sanders movement, the understanding of election fraud, which I covered a lot on Redacted Tonight in 2016, the election fraud in the primary, the laughable voting system we have here in the United States. A large Harvard study called it the worst in the Western world, and I felt like the information and corruption coming out from WikiLeaks on that front showed the collusion between the media and the DNC, and it got a lot of people to ask a lot of very important questions on that topic. And then the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the information that came out about that, and ultimately Donald Trump pulled out of it, as he is a moron, in my opinion. He pulled out for all the wrong reasons and may very well rejoin it. But the fact that ever happened, and at least right now, the TPP is not of completion, has to do with the information that came out through WikiLeaks. And you put all these together, and it really is the largest dissent and protest movements in this world that have taken place over the past 10 years. And they all seem to have been to either a small degree or often a very large degree sparked by the information coming out from WikiLeaks. And personally, that was obviously influential in my own activism. I was at the first night of Occupy, and I was at a lot of Occupy encampments around America and Canada, and it helped grow me as both a comedic journalist, if that's a thing, and as an activist, and and so I think it was pivotal for me, but I think more than that, it's been pivotal for our society as a whole. And all of these things I just listed is why WikiLeaks and Julian Assange are so dangerous to a system that is a profit over all else, a war for wealth over the welfare of people system that is completely unsustainable. It kills so many people around the world every day, and most of the pushback that system has gotten in a large sense has at least been slightly sparked by WikiLeaks.
I completely agree, and I appreciate you walking us through those different social movements. We've actually had another guest who brought up some of those movements as well, and I think it's really fantastic that we're discussing those impacts that WikiLeaks has had. And I also want to say thank you for holding up the WikiLeaks files, because as Julian Assange is silenced right now, it is even more imperative that people look at the text that he's authored and actually read his words, because obviously he can't speak to us right now. So thank you for that.
Yeah, people should read and reread that book, because even if you've already read it, there's no way you aren't going to find more you missed the first time around. And it is such an impressive and cogent analysis of what's going on in our world, and the way the hegemony actually works, and kind of what it wants and how it's getting it. So yeah, I think people should get that book or reread it.
Yeah, Julian Assange has written a number of books, and I will try to get links to those in the chat for you all to look up and to read and to find yourselves. Do you have any sentiments that you want to share about how you feel the audience can help WikiLeaks directly? I know you've already spoken about the need for independent journalists to come out and support Julian Assange, but what can somebody do at home who is not a journalist and is not a comedian, but who wants to participate but feels powerless and unempowered to actually make a difference?
Well, I know your last guest talked about civil disobedience, and I think that is very important. These are crucial times, and that is definitely a significant step. For so many people watching out there that maybe aren't, either willing or able to put their bodies on the line, I think that a lot of it just has to do with having the conversations and talking to people about what Julian Assange created, about what WikiLeaks is, and not allowing that discussion to get sidelined in the mud, which is what our propaganda outlets want us to do. They want us to fight about and bicker about something that Julian tweeted that you might not agree with. They really want that to be the discussion. So I think when people are talking to others, friends and family members and stuff, and posting on social media about this stuff, you need to have the actual legitimate debate, which is whether a journalist, and people can keep in mind that nothing WikiLeaks has ever put out has been proven false. So this is a journalistic outlet with one of the best track records, or the best track record that anyone has ever seen. And whether journalists like that should be imprisoned for years on end without contact to the outside world for their work. And I think that has to be the debate. Shift the debate. Don't let them pull you into what the debate they want you to have, because no matter where you come out on it, you've already been sidetracked. You've already been removed from the important discussion that needs to be had, and get angry. And part of getting angry, I think, for a lot of people is to realize how this isn't about one man. This is about an idea, and our freedom of press and our freedom of information. That's what this fight is about, and people need to realize that. Because I think it's too easy to be like, oh well, it's just one person, so I'm not really going to, get all up in arms over one, another victim of this. But it is the ideas, and I think that's why people need to be totally furious about this.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important distinction. I know some of the pushback that that Caitlin Johnstone and myself and others have gotten when we report on Julian Assange being mistreated in the way that he is persecuted by this unelected power structure. People say, well, there are hundreds and hundreds of people dying every day from various aspects of this, which is true and absolutely valid. But as you're saying, the importance of what is happening to Julian Assange is that it harms all of us. It harms the ability for press to be free. It harms the information that journalists have access to as independent journalists. And it harms, the taxpayers even who in the UK who are paying for the policing of the embassy. So there are all of these ways that the WikiLeaks and what Julian Assange does is empowering us and is in our benefit. So therefore, it is a massive loss for us. It harms us to have him continue to be silenced. So
yeah, and it's like when Chris Hedges and some others took Obama to court over the NDAA because it basically allowed for the imprisonment of journalists without a trial or charges. This is the same idea. This is they were trying to take Obama to court based on that idea. That is something that should not be legal in our country, and I believe anywhere in the world. And this fight is the exact same idea.
Absolutely. Do you have can you explain to the audience how you evolved from, like, because you mentioned before that comedians often, are not particularly politically minded. So what kind of created for you personally your unique brand of activism as journalism? I mean, I know it was the Occupy movement, but what really changed your mind about viewing comedy as a vehicle of activism as opposed to just for laughs?
Well, yeah, I was an activist before Occupy. I think Occupy just lit more of a fire under it, maybe. But yeah, I just I grew up just wanting to be a comedian, and it wasn't about politics. But then as I began to learn more about what's going on in our world, and I was going to say earlier that the only other book I can think of that really lays out the American hegemony as well as the WikiLeaks files is John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And that book was pivotal in my understanding of things and how we use economics to crush so many countries, or to at least keep them under our guidance, doing what we want, treating their people the way that is beneficial to our profit at the end of the day. So as I became more informed on this stuff, and the Iraq War was popping off in 2003, and I think for most young Americans, that was a time of like, wait, we really just go to war for no reason? I mean, even before we knew there were no weapons of mass destruction, it was still like, wait, why are we just totally destroying this country? And so I think that woke a lot of people up as to like the fact that our wars are not at all what we're told they are, or for the reasons, and the number of people dying in them is horrific, to say the least. So so I started being more of an activist off stage, but then I kind of felt like, well, I'm given this platform in that my career is as a comedian, and I want to use that platform. There aren't many performance or art forms out there left where you speak your mind. You don't speak a script. And I kind of felt like if I'm going to be on stage every night of the week, I want to talk about important shit. And so I started talking more. I started putting more and more politics or activism, cultural commentary into my act, and it grew from there. And I do think that comedy and maybe art in general are uniquely positioned to get people to listen to ideas that they might turn off from too quickly to really think about them or analyze them or give them a chance. People might listen to something that's funny a little longer than if it were boring and they're just like, oh, that's not the immediate viewpoint that I have, that doesn't immediately ping the little dopamine response that says, I agree, so therefore I'm going to shut it off. Well, luckily, comedy has this thing where it excites people who, even when they don't agree with it, they're willing to listen a little longer. And so I think it's important. It's important in that respect. Another thing that I feel like was pivotal for me, and hopefully the viewers can find kind of useful in its meeting, is not actually it's a little bit funny, so maybe it's got some comedic relationship, but there was a death row prisoner in Texas named Kenneth Foster who was going to be executed. This is probably 2004 or 5 or something. Maybe, yeah, somewhere in there. Anyway, he was going to be executed, but unlike most executions in the U.S. that anyone's ever heard of, the prosecution said that he had not killed anyone. He was driving a car. His friend got out, got in a fight, killed someone. They were going to put the driver to death under what they call the law of parties, which if you're even near someone who kills someone, we can execute you. So it was about 4 days before the execution. He'd exhausted all the appeals and everything. And I was just a small time comedian. I didn't have a platform. I didn't even have a YouTube show back then. I don't know if YouTube existed yet, really. And so I was like, how can I have some kind of impact? The only way this guy's life is going to be saved is if Governor Rick Perry commutes the sentence, and Rick Perry loved executing people, so it seemed very unlikely. And so I called the governor's office, and I said I was making a film about the death of Kenneth Foster. And she put me through to the press secretary, and I said, I want to interview the governor. And, she was like, well, I could ask the governor about a possible interview. And I said, great, you could just email me back on the movie's website. It's info@bloodontexashands.com. And that was a long, awkward pause. And so she said, okay, well, I'll get back to you. And I do feel that she probably brought that to Rick Perry to let him know this movie was being made. Now, I don't want to overstate my impact. There were plenty of activists in Texas that were sitting in his driveway and things like that. But I think that, and he ultimately commuted Kenneth Foster's, or not commuted, commuted. So he didn't get the death penalty, but he's still in jail, unfortunately. But he's still alive, and it showed whatever small impact my little pressure or moment of anxiety it might have given Rick Perry. It made me feel that a very small number of people working to save someone or help someone can have an impact. It's not all hopeless, even when it's those last 4 days before a very murderous governor is getting ready to execute someone. And for me, and I find this with a lot of activists, that you find out they had a moment where they had an impact, or they saw that sometimes they were just part of a lot of people, and they saw that could have an impact or change something. And once you see that, it's addictive in a good way, that you realize a small number of people can have a massive impact, despite all of the losses and all of the million times before that it wasn't able to change the path of things. Sometimes a very tiny number of people can change things. And I think Julian Assange and a small group of people that were the original people at WikiLeaks have proven that a small number of people can have a massive impact. And I just think people need to keep that in their mind as things seem so hopeless.
Absolutely. I think it's really fascinating, the creativity of that, of making, talking about making a documentary about the issue. That's the type of creativity that I think viewers and supporters of WikiLeaks and Julian need to employ to make this message heard. And it's really, I feel that people discount their own agency in this and in making a difference. So it's definitely impossible to overstate the importance of that type of action. Definitely. Yeah. And if you have any creative ideas about how people can help in any sort of ways that are legitimately out of the box, please extrapolate on them, because I know that a lot of people have, like, being in a moderating position, I see so many people asking over and over again, no matter what we say on the Vigil and no matter what we report on through our own media platforms, the constant question is, how can I help? I want to help. I support WikiLeaks and Julian, but I feel powerless. What do I do? And so if you have any creative ideas on that, I'd really like to hear them for our viewers.
Well, I would say that, calling these lawmakers and maybe finding creative ways to approach them. And I mean, probably over, phone or email or Twitter, creative ways to approach them that maybe they fear for their position, that maybe they fear that a lot of their voters are now caring about this issue. You got to think about what do these people in positions of power that actually have the ability to significantly change Julian's plight. What is it they fear for? Well, they fear for whether they're going to be reelected. They fear for whether their brand name is going to be tarnished in the media or on Twitter. So I think that is maybe one way to try and think a little more creatively how to influence them. But the small number of people that may at times go outside the window at the Ecuadorian embassy and stand there with candles or whatever else they're doing, I'm sure it feels at times somewhat hopeless. You see, if you're three people standing there outside the embassy, but I think a lot of this stuff feels hopeless until it's not. I think that the first civil rights activists sitting at the lunch counters when it's only 5 of them and they're getting spit on and beat up and called horrible names. I don't think they thought they were going to achieve civil rights the following day, and it took 10 years. And so I think you can't underestimate the ripples that small acts can have if you just keep at them. I don't want to overstate things and say, yeah, you show up there with that candle and we will win. But I think that people are too quick to just say, that's never going to do anything. It seems like it's a bit of a self-protection thing to say, we can't do it. It's not going to work. That would never work. They're too powerful. It's a bit of a self-protection thing. It's also kind of cooler in our society to be like, it's not happening. We're not going to do it. We can't do it. It's cooler to do that than to be the person that's like, come on, guys, we can do this. But I think that, maybe put your cynicism aside for a minute and realize that everything that's ever changed in this world started with a small number of people.
Yeah, I think there's like 2 prongs to that sentiment. There's the side that says, oh, this is so insurmountable that we'll never be able to make a difference. And then there's also the side that says, oh, it's already being taken care of. It's almost like too much hope, like too much, like this false idea that things will just sort themselves out without your interference. So definitely there are multiple facets of that apathy that, it's really sad. It's a sad statement on our culture that is cool to be apathetic.
Right. I think, and not just with this scenario, Julian Assange, but with our society as a whole, or what's going wrong, or our government, or the government of whichever country you're in right now watching this. A lot of people think like, oh, I'm sure someone's handling that. No one's handling it. No one is in charge of making sure that changes or that we fix things. Anytime you think like, they've got it. What can I do? No one's got it. No one's got it. Get in there. You be the one that's got it,
Exactly. No, I think that's one of the major things WikiLeaks has absolutely exposed. I mean, the things that happen and the way that the reality behind the scenes is so much not what we are told and what we expect sort of growing up in the society that we're in. So I think that's a definitely important point to prevent that sort of false sense of security in the way that the system operates.
Yeah, and actually a lot of the whistleblowers we know, or people that have stood up, you hear stories from them that they kept thinking someone else was going to do it. I think maybe Edward Snowden has said that at some point, that he kind of figured someone was going to reveal it and no one did. And I think he said then Obama got into power and he thought Obama would do something about it and he never did. And a lot of these people thought someone else was going to handle it and then realized, oh my God, it's on me. I think John Kiriakou has said the same, that he kept thinking someone else was going to blow the whistle on the torture, and it just, no one was revealing it, no one was stopping it, and ultimately a lot of whistleblowers suddenly realize, oh shit, it's me, I'm the one.
Absolutely incredible point, and very true. That is absolutely what John has told us. Multiple whistleblowers. I believe you're right about the quote from Snowden. That's exactly his sentiment, and I think that it speaks to the way in which our audience should understand that the people that act in this way are not some sort of idol. They're, as Susie has said, they're very much normal human beings who simply have made the right choice against really insane odds. So it's important not to underestimate the fact that we are all equally able to act in ways that truly do make a difference. And so I just wanted to repeat that, but I'm going to also just look through chat. I'm sure that we have a lot of comments and questions for you from them.
Come on, chatters.
Come on, chat, guys, collaborate with us. Come on. I want questions from you, but I also want your thoughts, Lee, as I look through what chat has to offer us. I want to know your thoughts, just on Julian Assange as a human being and the human rights that are being so hypocritically violated by the West, who then uses human rights as a battle cry against other nations. Can you talk about that hypocrisy with us when it comes to Julian Assange?
Yeah. I mean, it is. If there's one thing, America's #1 export is hypocrisy. So it's great for our GDP.
Very good point. Yeah.
No, I think I said on Redacted Tonight once that every time you hear an American official say, "Oh, we got to go in because there's human rights abuses over there," or we're gonna, we're gonna put economic sanctions on this country because of the human rights abuses. It's like, we are the #1 perpetrator of human rights abuses, and whenever we're saying that, I kind of view it as like a hot dog salesman is upset that another hot dog salesman's on his corner. It's basically like the American officials are like, you can't do human rights abuses. That's our thing. We have cornered the market on that. I mean, the number of people dying, David DeGraw's piece recently said, I think that 100 under the Trump administration, 140 bombs a day roughly are being dropped, killing, God knows how many innocent civilians. And that number was, like 100 under Obama. So it's not like it wasn't horrific under Obama as well. And so, yeah, these to act like for America to act like we, stand up for journalists and stand up for freedom of press and things like that. Meanwhile, our officials are pushing the containment of Julian Assange. Many of them have pushed the assassination of Julian Assange. Some have talked about dropping a drone bomb on the Ecuadorian embassy. I mean, those statements should be horrific to any journalist out there, or anyone who respects the job, the duty of relaying truth to the public. And these people are, the amazing thing is, these officials that say these things, they aren't drummed out, they are propped up, they are, continue to recycle and come forward no matter the level of war crimes they've been involved in the past. The same people that helped push the invasion of Iraq with the WMD lie are now front and center, again, largely pushing Russiagate. Mueller was the head of the FBI when we invaded Iraq, and you can watch his Senate testimony saying there's WMD and we have to invade Iraq. And now 1 million people are dead for these lies. And obviously these people should be in jail for war crimes. But if they're not going to be in jail, how about they're just not allowed to ever have a job in government again, or they're never allowed on our media, our corporate media again? But instead, it's quite the opposite. They're put forward as if they have some sort of expertise, and their expertise seems to be war crimes. So yeah, there's plenty of hypocrisy to go around. Absolutely,
and in the inverse of that is we have the same actual patriots and heroes, like the members of the Veteran Intelligence Professional Society, VIPs. I know you've spoken to Ray McGovern, and they spoke out against the Iraq War before it happened, but they didn't have the reach that they now have through the internet and through social media. And I know that they have, continued to speak out against false narratives in the last few years. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'd really like to hear them, because I know that you've been a big fan of Ray McGovern's and VIPs for a while.
Yeah, everybody should look up VIPS or Ray McGovern. Ray McGovern has a website you can find pretty easily. And yeah, he was for those who don't know, 27-year CIA veteran. He would briefed the first President Bush, and then retired in 1990. And actually, this is another example of someone who thought that they could be retired, and then he realized that no one else was from the CIA or from, with his level of experience, was standing up and saying that this was wrong, calling out the crimes that were going on under our government. And so he helped found VIPS, and their first thing they ever did was put out a statement to George Bush saying that the information, the intel he was getting on weapons of mass destruction was incorrect, and he was going to invade a country for under false pretenses. Now, I think that I don't know Bush himself, but the military-industrial complex and those telling him what to do or whatever, they didn't care whether there were WMD there or not. They probably knew there weren't, and they just they needed to invade Iraq for the geopolitical power, a combination of the oil and the central banking and a few other details there. But but in terms of what Ray's done is Ray realized that other people were not going to come forward and talk about these things that ex-CIA, and the VIPS continues to put out very important memos. One of the most recent ones was their evidence that the quote unquote hack of the DNC was actually an internal leak. And they put out that statement. And if it is a leak, that obviously means that it wasn't Russia or any outside hacker. So yeah, that's very important information, and it's yet again an example of someone realizing that no one else was going to speak out about this stuff, at least not from his branch of government, and he became an activist. And most recently, he was tackled and basically beaten for speaking out at Gina Haspel's confirmation, which I talked earlier about how these people that are guilty of war crimes are recycled and put back in new positions. Well, Gina Haspel now has set head of the CIA, and she oversaw the torture program in certain areas of the world. And those who were involved in the torture program should have been drummed out, should have been forced out. But instead, you see that those who prove they are willing to partake in these war crimes, or the militarism and the American empire that is crushing so many lives with our military, those who are willing to be involved in it are rewarded with higher positions. And anyway, for those who didn't see it, during her hearing, Ray McGovern stood up and calmly said that she was guilty of war crimes and oversaw torture, and he was dragged out and tackled and heavily bruised. But I saw him 2 days later, and he was of chipper spirits because he was of pure mind as to what he did, why he did it. And to me, that's something very powerful, is you've got, someone who was beaten up. And by the way, because he's in his 70s, his arms were all purple from this bruising, because you bruise easily in your 70s. And there was not a glint of sadness in his eyes, because he was doing what he knew he needed to do. And I think when you have a purity of purpose and mind like that, it is very powerful, and can really keep the passion alive in what you do, and gives life meaning as well. So I think that people should remember that, if you want to look at the selfish side of things, which I always like to look at the selfish side of things, It's very energizing and worthwhile to stand up for what's right in this world.
Absolutely. And I think that Ray McGovern and the other members of VIPS have been such an example to us as far as what actual patriotism looks like, because not only in their stance against war, but also in the way that they have, in the same way that we are trying to be as bipartisan in our support for Assange as possible. VIPS has called out, presidents and secretaries of state from both political parties over time. So I think it's an inspiration to see that they always seem to put truth above ideology. And I think that is a huge example to all of us. And to go back earlier to what you were saying about the revolving door, that is something we've mentioned a number of times during this vigil. And it's such a crucial point because it's something that WikiLeaks has had a unique role in exposing, in practically all of their leaks, whether it's to do with the interrelationship between the DNC and the press, whether it's, at the State Department and the technocracy. You have all of these different levels of revolving door, and I didn't know if you had any more comments on that, or how maybe WikiLeaks has uniquely sort of revealed that.
Well, I think that it's yet again, this actually connects back to what I was saying about a lot of journalists. Is I think it shows that you're rewarded in these career paths if you prove you are willing to do what's needed for the, in this case, the empire or the American empire or whatever your section of it is, your duty is. You move up at the NSA if you are fine with surveilling the entirety of the American public and you don't show any qualms about that. You move up at the State Department if you are fine with the economic destruction that we reap around the world. To show the level of sickness this is, when Tillerson was I played this clip once on my show. When Tillerson was at the Secretary of State, he didn't speak publicly that often, but he was doing a on-stage thing with Condoleezza Rice, and he pointed to the fact that North Korean fishermen were washing up dead, starved to death on ghost ships because our sanctions had made it so impossible to eat in North Korea that these fishermen were fishing later and later in the season to try and survive, and they were dying of starvation on these boats. And Tillerson, you would think a normal human being with any ounce of empathy would go, isn't that horrible? But Tillerson was using it as an example of, look at how great our sanctions are. Look at how well they're working. And I granted Tillerson didn't rise up at the State Department. He came from ExxonMobil. But the point is, if you're willing to have those kind of thoughts, if you're willing to be a borderline sociopath, you can rise up in these institutions if you never question things such as sanctions that cause people to starve to death. If you are willing to be that careerist and have those horse blinders on for this is what needs to be done, then you rise up in these areas. Now the same goes for the corporate world, right? I believe we do live in inverted totalitarianism, which is ruled by the anonymous corporate state. And look at who gets to the boards of corporation. It is those who have almost no empathy. It is those who are borderline sociopathic that put profit before all else. If at any point during a 20 or 40-year career, you say, whoa, hey, everybody, shouldn't we worry about the people that are getting hurt? Not them, in this scenario, like what if we call back those tires because people are dying and it might cost a lot of money, but what if a couple of people die? If you do that a couple of times, you're not rising up that ladder. You're not going to end up in that boardroom. You're not going to end up at the head of ExxonMobil the way that Tillerson did. And you're not then going to end up as Secretary of State. So it really is that it's not just a revolving door. It's that those who prove that they are willing to put often profit above all else, but, in some cases, I guess it's the American power above all else. If they're willing to do that for decades on end, then they can rise up to the top. As Gina Haspel has proven with the CIA, she was willing to torture everybody. And some of the things she oversaw was the beating of a pregnant woman that ended up miscarrying. And if you're willing to do that type of thing and don't have qualms with it, then you can rise up to the top of these power structures.
Yeah, and that I'm looking at some of the questions we have from chat, and one of the questions is, why aren't politicians who kill millions in jail, who has the authority to kill just because you're president? And I think that really addresses the reason for that, the core reason being that the whole structure is built in a way that supports those types of crimes, as you've just discussed with Tillerson, et cetera, et cetera. And it almost seems like that pedigree of sociopathy is what helps definitely allow them to move from the trusted circles in one aspect of this unelected power structure to the other part of it, et cetera, which is just self-perpetuating and awful. But we have about 10 minutes left. What are the sort of like really, final thoughts you have for the audience to take in mind as we continue to see Julian Assange silenced? Are there any other thoughts that you have to share with us and to encourage people to keep fighting for Julian Assange's freedom and his freedom of speech?
Well, I would just say it's never too late. I think so many of the people that fought tirelessly for Chelsea Manning probably thought it was highly likely she would never get out of prison, or at least not for decades and decades. So I think that's a perfect example of never say never. And the amount of effort it took to keep Chelsea Manning's story in the forefront of the American mind to such a degree that Obama was ultimately willing to let her out. I think that was really impressive, and it took a willingness to fight against all odds for the protesters and for the people that were really helped organize that continuously. And I know that both Assange and WikiLeaks worked hard to help Chelsea Manning. And to me, it's one of the best examples of you can think that all is lost, that there's really no hope of getting someone out of these situations where they are being punished for being a whistleblower or for being a journalist. But it's not. It's really not hopeless over the long arc of time. I hope we have enough time to achieve that end for Julian. And you can also look at the way history will view people. It changes heavily. Look at Nelson Mandela, who was called a terrorist and imprisoned. And Daniel Ellsberg, when he first revealed the Pentagon Papers, was called a communist and everything else. And now he's held up as a shining light of being a whistleblower. And I would like to remind all of the faux liberals out there that hold up Ellsberg as a true great American, that you should feel the same way about Julian Assange and Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning. And the fact that you hold up Ellsberg because it's chic or acceptable in those elite liberal circles, but then at the same time say that Snowden is a traitor and Assange deserves to be drone bombed or whatever, is complete hypocrisy.
Absolutely. I think it's really important. It's important to see the hypocrisy in not only enshrining some and then denigrating others who are doing very similar work, but also the way in which it's as if the establishment itself wants to see the dissidents of the past as an example of the functioning democracy and functioning system that we have, and the idea of these Western ideals of freedom of speech, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is that at the time those dissidents were active, they were not regarded with any sort of positive feeling from the establishment. They were very much abused by that same establishment. So I think
Martin Luther King as well.
Exactly. So I think that remembering that and that is the reality of the history is important. So
yeah,
thank you for bringing that up.
And it shows that this idea of the personality attacks, goes back a long ways. So, Martin Luther King's personality was attacked endlessly. Saying he was a communist, a traitor, all of those things. A lot of the same words that are used against Julian Assange or Edward Snowden are the same things that Martin Luther King was being called, and he was quickly abandoned by anyone of the right in the country. But even a lot of the liberal elite abandoned Martin Luther King in his final year or two. because of that same type of propaganda.
And the same agencies even that are involved in persecuting Julian Assange, because the FBI, unbelievably enough, actually operated in England to persecute Julian Assange. And then you have the same agencies, as we know, and I am just saying this for the benefit of viewers who don't know, that the FBI actually threatened and persecuted Martin Luther King very directly and sent all sorts of threats and et cetera, et cetera. So it's really sad to see that parallel continuing through history.
Yeah, there's a famous letter that they sent to him trying to get him to take his own life.
Absolutely. And so I hate to end on a negative note, but I really do appreciate the time that you've spent with us, because I know that you have an extremely busy schedule. Do you want to let people know where you'll be in the next few weeks or months, where they can find you? I obviously Redacted Tonight, your show is amazing, but are there any other comedy spots that you'd like to let people know that you will be at?
Thanks. I just finished a big tour, so I don't have that many dates coming up for live stand-up comedy, but I do tape Redacted Tonight every week in Washington, D.C. Anyone's welcome to come. I also have a show next week in Asheville, North Carolina. I'll be performing at Vegan Fest. And the last thing that everyone can hear more conversations very similar to this, to political thought. I do a new podcast called Common Censored. So like common sense, but common censored. And I've started putting that out every week as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I know that we caught you on a very busy schedule of yours. So I really do appreciate you for joining us.
Thanks for all your work. I know you're doing many hours and it's truly incredible. So keep at it.